Welcome everyone to Lesson 4 for Module 2 for your Professional Diploma in Nutrition with Shaw Academy. Today we'll be discussing some popular weight loss diets and we'll aim to understand if they work and how you can start implementing them in your daily life. There's an ongoing debate as to which diet is the best diet, and as we've learned, there are so many factors that influence weight loss, and as the research currently stands, over a longer time frame of about 12 months, a high-fat, low-carb diet yields the same amount of weight loss as a high-carb, low-fat diet. You all know me by now. I am, of course, Abby the dietitian. Remember to keep your questions coming. The more you interact with us, the more you will learn. The objectives for today's lesson include understanding more about low-fat diets, low-carb diets, and low-calorie diets. We'll discuss what they are, their history, the pros and cons of each, as well as their misperceptions. Once again, guys, let's dive right in to popular weight loss diets. Do they work or are you wasting your time? Right, guys, so let's kick off our lesson with low-fat diets. A low-fat diet is characterized by a range of about 45 to 60% carbohydrates, 15 to 35% protein, and anywhere between 20 and 30% fat. The reason why this is an effective diet is because fat is very energy dense, as we have discussed before, and so limiting it is an effective way to decrease calories. As we'll learn shortly, one of the greatest shortcomings of a low-fat diet is choosing foods that are highly processed over their minimally processed counterparts. When choosing to go low-fat, choose minimally processed, naturally low-fat foods, and if choosing convenience foods, choose ones that are lower in solid fats and added sugars. As with any diet, there will always be a moderate version and there will be an extreme version. These percentage values are for a moderate low-fat diet. But you also get what is called a very low-fat diet, and this is when a diet comprises of less than 10% calories from fat, for example, the Dr. Dean Ornish program. You also get a variation of a very low-fat diet where it is less than 20% calories from fat. In other words, the diet will have a range of between 10 and 20% calories from fat. As with any extreme dieting, low-fat or otherwise, a very low-fat diet will result in rapid weight loss. However, as we discussed in our previous lesson on weight loss basics, rapid weight loss can cause a host of problems from feelings of dizziness to gout attacks. It is also naturally a very restrictive diet and as such increases your risk for malnutrition. In the long term, very low-fat diets are not superior to any other form of calorie restriction, and as always, if you cannot stick to the diet, then it's not the correct diet for you. In recent memory, low-fat diets were popularized by the diet-heart hypothesis and the 7-country studies conducted in 1950 by Ancel Keys. This study hypothesized that a decrease in dietary fat and cholesterol could lead to a decreased heart disease risk. As the study became publicized, low-fat dietary recommendations became mainstream, and this was followed by a concurrent rise in the production of low-fat food products. We now know that the 7-country study was deeply flawed and biased, and unfortunately what was not realized at the time is that the replacement of fats in the diet with refined carbohydrates and sugars would lead to negative health implications. The current guidelines, as we have discussed before, for good health and to improve insulin sensitivity is to not replace the fats in the diet with refined carbohydrates or sugars, but rather with unsaturated fats, particularly polyunsaturated fats or omega-3. What is also currently known is that dietary cholesterol doesn't impact your serum or blood cholesterol as much as we previously thought. So foods that were previously demonized, like eggs, due to their cholesterol content, are now seen as a healthy part of a balanced diet. Let's take a look at some of the pros of a low-fat diet. Naturally, low-fat diets are usually relatively high in carbohydrates, fruits, and vegetables, and due to this nutritional profile, it may assist in reducing your risk for some cancers. It may also reduce your risk for heart disease, may be high in fiber, may alleviate premenstrual symptoms in some women, and may also be a strategy to maintain weight loss, as seen in the National Control Weight Registry. On the flip side, if people with certain genetic profiles follow a low-fat diet, it may cause a shift in their lipid profile towards a more atherogenic profile than the original. This means that these people will be more prone to heart disease on a low-fat diet than if they were not on a low-fat diet. You also get a healthy low-fat diet and you get an unhealthy low-fat diet. An unhealthy low-fat diet consists of highly processed low-fat foods and is often very low in nutrients and may contain added sugar to improve the flavor profile. The reason this is done is because fat gives a good mouth feel and flavor, and without the fat, the food manufacturers still needed to make their food tasty, and so sugar was added. If you do decide to go to the extreme and follow a very low-fat diet, as we said, this is a restrictive eating pattern and may result in deficiencies of certain vitamins like vitamin B12, E, and the mineral zinc. Lastly, some low-fat products may not be suitable for young children. Remember that low-fat milk, this is the 1 or 2% milk, and non-fat milks are inappropriate for infants during the first 12 months of life. Not only do these infants take in too much protein with these large volumes of milk in an effort to meet their energy needs, but they may also become deficient in essential fatty acids. One of the biggest myths I hear when it comes to the proponents of a low-fat diet is that consuming any dietary fat is detrimental to weight loss. As we've learned in our previous lesson, the consumption of dietary fat is vital for a variety of functions, even if you are following a low-fat diet. Although fat is energy dense, it's also very filling. So if you include it in your diet in a meaningful way, it has multiple functions, helps to keep you feeling full, and can also increase the enjoyability of the meal. Another popular misconception is that all low-fat foods are healthy. I remember as a child when my mom would scour the shops for low-fat products, not even taking the time to glance at the rest of the ingredients. Remember, just because something is labeled as low-fat does not make it healthy. A good example of this is gummy sweets. These are fat-free, however, they are made almost entirely out of sugar. We know that the overconsumption of sugar is definitely not healthy and that this type of food is devoid of nutrients. So even though it's labeled fat-free, it's definitely not a healthy choice. Last but not least, many believe that all low-fat foods contain sugar. This is something I did debunk for you guys in Module 1. Remember that while many processed low-fat foods do contain sugar, just because they're low-fat does not mean that they automatically do. I want you guys to get into the habit of checking the nutrition labels. If sugar is listed on the ingredients, then you know it contains added sugar. On some nutrition labels, however, intrinsic sugar has been labeled under sugar in the total carbohydrate section. This doesn't mean that they've put extra sugar in that product, but rather that they contain naturally occurring sugars. So look at the label. If the ingredients contain sugar, it has added sugar. If the nutrition label indicates that there is sugar under the total carbohydrates, this may also include intrinsic sugars. Okay, guys? So practically, how are you going to go about applying some low-fat diet principles in your everyday life? The key, as we mentioned before, is to include minimally processed, naturally low-fat foods regularly. This includes fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and high-fiber starches, including most of our vegetarian protein sources like legumes and certain lean proteins. Once again, I want you guys to get into the habit of reading nutrition labels. This really can help you make the right choices when you are purchasing food. So food is considered to be low in fat when it contains less than 3 grams of fat per serving, and it's considered to be low in saturated fat when it contains less than 1 gram of saturated fat per serving. If you're purchasing meat products and want to know if you're on the right track, you can go ahead and look for lean or extra lean products. A lean product contains less than 10 grams of fat or 4.5 grams of saturated fat and less than 95 milligrams of cholesterol per 100 grams, while an extra lean product will have less than 5 grams of fat, less than 2 grams of saturated fat, and also less than 95 milligrams of cholesterol, again per 100 grams. Reading nutrition labels is an incredibly helpful way to know if you're on the right track with your specific dietary choices, especially when you're purchasing food products versus minimally processed foods. So let's take a little bit of time to look at some more practical methods on how you can implement healthy, low-fat guidelines in your life. So first of all, if we look at a variety of cooking methods, I want you to remember that often many of us are really heavy-handed when it comes to oil when we cook. Remember that a serving of oil is a teaspoon and a portion is 1 to 3 servings per meal. This means that many of us are overshooting our portion size for our meal, and this is one of the ways that you're consuming more calories than intended. One of the ways to avoid this is to use a non-stick pan. This eliminates the need for excessive oil when cooking. You can also use alternative methods to cook your food like broiling or grilling, baking, steaming, or stir frying. When you use these methods instead of frying or deep frying, you will naturally reduce your oil intake. Remember, oil during cooking often makes our food taste moist. You can also achieve similar results by using broth, juice, or water when preparing your food. A hidden source of fat is often ready-made sauces. You can limit your intake of these by making your own sauces. My personal favorite is to use tinned tomatoes as a base for almost anything, and then you can use herbs and spices to add flavor. We know from our previous lesson that herbs and spices not only add flavor, but they can also be anti-inflammatory and may also assist with liver detoxification. So not only are they tasty, but they are very healthy as well. Next up, I want you guys to try your best to limit your intake of meat drippings or oil to create gravy for your meal. Once again, you can use flavorful liquids like wine, lemon juice, broth, tomato sauce, or bouillon cubes. A really neat trick to implement is to make a meaty or fatty dish in advance. You then refrigerate it and the fat will solidify on the top where you can easily skim it off. Right, guys, and then when you are making protein foods, I want you to remember you can reduce your fat intake by using legumes or tofu frequently. Remember, they're not only a source of protein, but they're also low in fat and a fantastic way to extend your meals. I want you to reduce the fat from your protein food sources by removing the skin off your poultry and cutting the visible fat off your meat cuts. Remember to choose lean or extra lean meat products wherever applicable, and choose plain, unsweetened, low-fat or reduced-fat dairy products, as well as lower-fat cheeses. Remember, this should also be used sparingly. You can find lower-fat cheeses by looking again at the nutrition label. They contain less than 20 grams of fat per 100 grams. When consuming tuna, choose tuna that is canned in brine rather than in oil. Try to limit high-fat spreads like butter or mayonnaise. Once again, a serving of these foods is approximately a teaspoon. It's very easy to overconsume them. Rather use legume-based spreads like hummus or black bean spread to add moisture and flavor. And lastly, if you are desperate for a creamy base or a creamy dressing, rather use low-fat evaporated milk or low-fat plain yogurt instead of cream or mayonnaise. This slide illustrates so well why replacing cream with an alternative is just so effective at cutting not only your fat intake but also your energy intake. Can you see that per 100 ml of cream it has a whopping 347 calories and 37 grams of fat, whereas low-fat evaporated milk has less than half the amount of calories at 143 calories and 8.05 grams of fat, with low-fat plain yogurt being the lowest at 63 calories and a minuscule 1.55 grams of fat. Okay guys, so for now that wraps up our low-fat diet. You now know how to take some practical steps into implementing a low-fat diet in your daily life. So with low-fat diets done and dusted, let's move on to low-carb diets. So low-carb diets are currently all the rage. Interestingly, there are no set guidelines to what constitutes a low-carb diet. But according to a paper written by Schwingschwackel et al., a very low-carb diet or ketogenic diet consists of less than 10% carbs, 20 grams per day, approximately 10% of protein, and anywhere between 70 to 80% of fat. A low-carb diet has anywhere between 10 to 25% carbohydrates, 10 to 30% protein, and 25 to 45% fat. A moderate carb diet consists of anywhere between 26 to 44% carbohydrates, 10 to 30% protein, and 25 to 35% fat. A high carb diet consists of anywhere between 45 to 65% carbohydrates, again 10 to 30% protein, and 25 to 35% fat. And very lastly, we have our very high carbohydrate diets, which have more than 65% carbohydrates, 10 to 30% protein, and 25 to 35% fat, depending on which carbohydrate and protein range you choose. What I want to highlight here is that a low carb diet can either be low carb, moderate fat, high protein, or low carb, moderate protein, high fat. Okay, so remember, low carb literally is only referring to the carb. It's not referring to the protein or the fat. That still needs to be stipulated. 3 of the most popular low carb diets are the Atkins diet, paleo diet, and ketosis. The Atkins diet was made popular by Dr. Robert C. Atkins, and it's also known as the controlled carb approach. It's been tweaked and amended throughout the years, but currently it consists of 4 phases. The first phase is known as induction and encourages the dieter to enter ketosis for rapid weight loss. Phase 2 is for ongoing weight loss. Phase 3 is for pre-maintenance, and the final phase 4 is the maintenance phase. The diet encourages you to have protein at each meal and also encourages carbohydrate counting. The range of carbohydrates allowed depends on the stage, and it can be anywhere between 20 to 100 grams per day. The paleo diet is a diet that is considered to be high in protein and high in fiber, and it's made popular by the premise that this is the way that our ancestors or the cavemen ate. It promotes that you eliminate processed foods, dairy, refined sugar, potatoes, salt, and refined oils from your diet. The foods that are encouraged include lean meats, fish, fruits, vegetables, eggs, nuts, and some oils like coconut and olive oil. If a person follows a very low carbohydrate diet, one of the physiological side effects is that you may go into a state of ketosis. Contemporary, very low carbohydrate ketogenic diets have become very popular amongst the lay public, as well as some healthcare professionals. Ketosis is essentially when your body transitions from using glucose as its main energy source to using fat or ketones. Remember that insulin, which is heavily involved in carbohydrate metabolism, stores energy from carbohydrates. If you're consuming less carbohydrates, then your body secretes less insulin. When there is less insulin secretion, there is also a reduction in fat accumulation. Ketosis only occurs after 3 days of fasting or following a very low carbohydrate diet, meaning that you're having less than 20 grams per day for some people. Only after this point, you'll have insufficient glucose to feed your central nervous system, and so then your central nervous system looks for alternative energy sources, which it can either get from gluconeogenesis, or the building up of glucose from other molecules like protein, or from ketones, which are formed by the breakdown of fat. In order for your body to reach a steady state ketone level where metabolic adaptation can occur, where the body becomes used to this new energy source, this can take anywhere up to 2 weeks. You may be worried about your blood sugar levels if you're not consuming carbohydrates, but interestingly, these levels remain stable because glucose is formed from certain proteins and fats. Like we said, this is called gluconeogenesis. Atkins, paleo, and ketosis are all relatively new diets in the grand scheme of things. So let's take it back a few hundred years and understand where low-carb dieting started. It apparently all started when William Banting, who was a formerly obese English undertaker, lost weight by eating 4 meals a day, eating mainly meat, greens, fruits, dry wine, and avoiding sugar, saccharine matter, starch, beer, milk, and butter. He documented his diet in a letter of corpulence addressed to the public, which became very popular very quickly. Besides weight loss, very low carbohydrates diets like the ketogenic diet have also traditionally been used for the management of epilepsy in children where drugs have failed. This has also had varying levels of success. So what are the pros of following a low-carb diet? Well, first, it advocates that you remove ultra-processed carbohydrates from your diet. Remember, guys, that this is not unique to low-carb diets because all healthy eating guidelines do recommend this. However, I have found that when some patients follow a moderate diet approach where they allow themselves to have treats, sometimes they find they can't control their cravings or the intake of these foods. With a low-carb diet approach, there are more strict rules to follow, and patients who have an all-or-nothing mentality often will find this beneficial. Eating low carb will also lower your insulin levels as they contain very little carbohydrates, and this is beneficial for those of you who have insulin related problems like insulin resistance, diabetes, polycystic ovarian syndrome, or metabolic syndrome, just to name a few. When the fat replacement on this diet is done correctly, so remember to replace saturated fats with unsaturated fats, this may lead to a reduction in heart disease as long as the daily calories do not increase, which will then lead to weight gain, and weight gain is counterintuitive when it comes to heart disease risk. Lastly, a low-carb, high-fat diet can result in a greater amount of weight loss, at least in the short term. This kind of drastic weight loss can be very motivating and can encourage you to stick with a plan. With this in mind, let's explore some of the reasons why you lose weight on a low-carb diet. Some of the short-term reasons for weight loss can be attributed to an increased energy expenditure due to food thermogenesis. You may also have a reduced appetite. This is when the diet induces ketosis, which, as we will soon learn, is not always the case on all low-carb diets. Low-carb diets also have a diuretic effect, and this is due to ketosis as well as reduced insulin levels. Remember that glycogen is one of the ways that your body stores carbohydrates, mainly in your muscles. When following a low-carb diet, the body first depletes its stores before using fat or ketones for energy. Each little glycogen molecule holds onto 2 water molecules, and so when the glycogen is used up, not only do you lose the weight of the glycogen molecule, but also the weight of the 2 water molecules. So the initial weight loss from a low-carb diet may in fact be mostly water. In the longer term, when a low-carb diet is appropriate for an individual, the main reason for continued weight loss is due to the fact that following this type of diet in most cases does induce a form of calorie restriction. We know from our lessons on weight loss that this is indeed the foundation for losing weight. So to summarize, in the short term, low-carb diets may result in more weight loss than high-carb, low-fat diets. This being said, in the long term, the average weight loss seems to be the same across the board. As you'll hear me say time and time again, a person's personal preference should always be taken into account before dietary recommendations are made for an individual. Remember that very low-carb diets may be difficult to maintain due to poor adherence. Poor adherence is only one of the drawbacks to a low-carb diet. Some of the other cons include that ketosis leads to an increase in uric acid concentration. This is bad news, guys, because it can increase your risk for kidney stones. Remember from our last lesson that rapid weight loss can also do the same. So with a low-carb diet, if you are this way inclined, then either this is not the right plan for you, or you must ensure that you are adequately hydrated to help flush this additional uric acid from your system. As with any restrictive diet, a low-carb diet can also pose the possibility for poor nutrient intake, especially for vitamins E, A, thiamine, vitamin B6, folate, and the minerals calcium, magnesium, iron, potassium, and also fiber. The low fiber intake is due to a lack of intake of high fiber carbohydrates like starchy vegetables, most fruits, legumes, and whole grains. Remember that the type of fat that replaces carbohydrate sources in this diet is also not always clearly stipulated, and this may lead to an increased intake of saturated fat and cholesterol. These possible nutrient deficiencies may be exacerbated when you choose low nutrient, high energy options frequently. For example, if you eat butter all day, every day, you'll be following a low carb diet, but you'll also be woefully lacking in all sorts of essential nutrients. And although you will lose weight, your health will most definitely suffer. And this will not be a diet that will be pleasant to follow, and it will not be sustainable. A really good example of this is the very popular bullet coffee. This is a morning drink made popular by the low-carb movement where you add butter and or coconut oil to your morning coffee as a meal replacement. Guys, it will most definitely make you feel full due to the fat content, but again, it is incredibly low in nutrients. And once again, this may help you with weight loss in the short term, but in the long term, you may start to suffer from micronutrient deficiencies if you do not plan your meals to include the variety the body needs. So let's go ahead and debunk some of the common misperceptions of a low-carb diet. So the first misperception is that a low-carb diet will aid weight loss for everyone. Remember, guys, that this is a one-size-fits-all mentality. There is no one superior diet for everyone, and your individual results will depend on your genetics, and your health outcomes will also depend on your genetics, as well as which foods you choose to eat regularly. So low versus high nutrient options. The second misperception is that you should eat no carbs when following a low-carb diet. We know from our first lesson together that carbohydrates are found in a wide variety of foods, from starches to dairy, as well as fruits and vegetables. When following a low-carb diet, your carbohydrate intake will vary, with the lowest range being 20 grams a day, but with this number going all the way up to 200 grams per day in some cases. Lastly, if you follow a low-carb diet, you must avoid thinking that all carbs are bad. Using words like good or bad in the context of any diet leads to a negative food mentality. When you eat bad foods, you naturally feel guilty and you feel like you have to compensate. Compensation usually includes some form of severe restriction, and as we know from the diet binge cycle, that restriction unfortunately usually leads to a binge. This is a surefire way to get stuck in the vicious cycle of dieting. One type of lower carb diet that I do want to highlight is the Mediterranean style diet. Although there is no uniform definition of this diet, it does include a moderate amount of total fats, anywhere between 32 and 35%, with relatively low saturated fat at 9 to 10%, and a focus on polyunsaturated fats, especially omega-3, and it is also relatively high in fiber, looking for about 27 to 37 grams per day. From a food perspective, this diet relies on olive oil as its main source of monounsaturated fats and is heavily influenced by plant-based foods like vegetables, legumes, fruits, and nuts. It encourages a moderate intake of fish and wine and suggests that you limit your red or processed meat intake as well as whole-fat dairy products. This dietary pattern has been shown time and time again to be healthful for most people, and it's honestly one of the patterns that I lean towards in my practice. It also obviously depends on a person's culture and personal preference. In a later module, I will be outlining the blue zones for you and how the Mediterranean diet is associated with this way of eating and is seen in parts of the world where people live the longest and have the least amount of chronic disease. Practically, how are you going to start moving towards a healthful low-carb diet? So for best weight loss, I want you to go ahead and replace some or most of your starchy carbohydrate with additional vegetables. A good example here would be to replace mashed potato with cauliflower mash. Remember to limit your saturated fat intake and rather replace your saturated fats with unsaturated fats. And lastly, please do not fall for highly processed convenience foods. At the end of the day, highly processed foods in general are not great for you, low carb or not, and so should be limited as much as possible. Once again, if you're living on processed snack bars, think to yourself, where is your body getting vital and essential nutrients from? Guys, I can tell you now, it's definitely not getting them from those snack bars. The last diet that we're going to talk about today is that of low-calorie diets. Let's start with the extreme version of a low-calorie diet. This diet is known as a very low-calorie diet. The two types I want to discuss here are medically supervised very low-calorie diets, and later we'll be talking about the protein-sparing modified fast. So first of all, medically supervised very low-calorie diets have been used for more than 40 years for the treatment of obesity. Typically, they contain no more than 800 calories, with their micronutrient content ranging from 20 to 80 grams of carbohydrates, 0.8 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight, and 15 to 30 grams of fat. An important point here is that the carbohydrate content of some very low-calorie diets is 20 to 50 grams per day, which may induce ketosis, but it can also be as high as 80 grams per day, and so not all very low calorie diets are ketogenic. This diet is formulated to induce rapid weight loss through calorie restriction and preserve lean muscle mass through adequate protein intake. The protein-sparing modified fast is also medically supervised, and it is also considered to be a very low-calorie diet. It consists of 500 to 800 calories per day, primarily from protein at 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilogram per day of ideal body weight. Fat is restricted to only that found in the protein foods allowed on the diet, such as lean meat, fish and seafood, and poultry, and carbohydrates are restricted to 20 to 50 grams per day, thus resulting in ketosis. Very low-calorie diets or protein-sparing modified fasts should be prescribed only in limited circumstances by trained clinicians. Patients must be medically supervised due to rapid weight loss and possible health complications, including possible medication adjustments to avoid hypoglycemia or low blood sugar and hypotension or low blood pressure levels. Of course, there are other less severe forms of low-calorie diets. This includes a moderate calorie restriction, where a patient is prescribed a diet of anywhere between 1,000 and 1,800 calories per day, depending on their current intake. Remember that for consistent weight loss, you want to try and aim for a reduction of 500 to 600 calories per day. This, as well as very low calorie diets, can be done with or without meal replacements, or milkshakes as they're commonly referred to. This is honestly a personal preference, and including meal replacements in a moderate calorie restricted diet will not provide better results in both the short or long term. However, if a patient would prefer a meal replacement, if it's more convenient or acceptable for them, then it's definitely a tool that can be utilized on their weight loss journey. A very popular method of eating is that of intermittent fasting. Two popular fasting techniques include the 5-2 method, where you eat normally for 5 days and then severely restrict your intake for 2 days. And you also have the 16-8 method, which includes fasting for 16 hours of the day and then only allowing feeding for 8 hours. The growing body of evidence from systematic reviews demonstrates that intermittent fasting achieves comparable weight loss to moderate calorie restriction. One of the benefits that intermittent fasting has over calorie restriction, though, is that it might improve compliance in some people. Guys, remember that due to the chronic relapsing nature of obesity, weight management strategies that propose a break in energy restriction could prolong weight loss by maximizing compliance. There is also an interest in the metabolic effect of fasting on improvements in health. Some of the proposed health benefits may include cardiometabolic effects and even improved aging. This being said, the jury is still out with regards to any definite recommendations, and so at the moment, all we can say is that more research is needed, but there are potentially some benefits to fasting, but once again, if it suits your personal preference. Some of the pros of a low-calorie diet is that there are many types of fasting techniques available, meaning that you can find one that suits your preference and your lifestyle. This means that it can be low-fat, low-carb, or even both. Guys, as with any diet, of course, there are also some cons. One of my pet hates is calorie counting. Almost all low-calorie diets encourage some form of calorie counting, whether it's manually, using an app, or using a point system. Now, guys, please don't get me wrong. Calorie counting can definitely work, and if it works for you, then I am incredibly happy for you. It's not something that I personally enjoy doing, and I find for me it creates more of an all-or-nothing mentality, and it perpetuates my food guilt. This just illustrates to you how personalized your diet is. Remember, what works for me may not work for you. The other con is that it has potential for nutrient deficiencies. It's not to say that you cannot get sufficient nutrients when fasting. You most definitely can. However, it just means that you have to place emphasis on the quality of the foods that you're eating to ensure that even though you're eating less, that you're still getting everything that you need. So as a brief conclusion on intermittent fasting, it represents a valid, albeit not apparently superior option to continuous energy restriction for weight loss. So guys, you are welcome to do intermittent fasting, but it's not better than just regular old dieting. Let's start wrapping up by looking at some common misperceptions for a low-calorie diet. Firstly, many think that fasting is suitable for everyone. Guys, this is certainly not true, and it will not suit everyone. It can even be dangerous for some people, like pregnant women or diabetics. Secondly, proponents of fasting also believe that it is a cure-all and that it's proven to decrease disease risk for everyone. As we've discussed at length, diseases are multifactorial, and so there cannot possibly be one solution for all diseases. Fasting may have some benefits for your health, but as we discovered, more research is definitely needed in this area before we can make any definite recommendations. So before we see what's coming up in the next lesson, let's take a moment to understand weight loss in the context of all of these popular diets. I want you guys to remember that all these popular diets will work for short-term weight loss. All diets typically work, but are they sustainable? So can you see yourself doing it for the long term? And are you following a diet in the most healthful way possible? If, when you are following any diet, you do lose weight, you will see an improvement in your cardiometabolic health. This means that your blood lipid levels, your blood sugar levels, and your blood pressure levels will all drop, guys, and this is due to the weight loss, not necessarily due to the type of diet that you are following. Unfortunately, though, no diet has been found to be optimal when it comes to reducing hunger. So again, this all falls to personal preference. And finally, guys, in the long term, which is more than 2 years, most popular diets have not been consistently researched, and so long-term weight loss and ultimate health outcomes are just not known. This is one of the many reasons why we encourage most people to follow healthy eating patterns as much as possible and as consistently as possible for best health and possibly weight outcomes. Guys, it's official. You are already halfway through module 2. I am so proud of you. You are doing so well. Really well done. In our next lesson, we'll be learning more about fad diets. I'll be teaching you about 3 specific diets, including the acid-alkaline diet, the blood group diet, and the typical detox diet, including how to go about doing a medical detox the right way. I'll guide you through what each diet entails, what the evidence is to back them, if there is any, as well as the pros and cons of each. Guys, I think let's recap what we've learned today. So we now know that calorie restriction is needed for weight loss. You can achieve this calorie restriction through following a low-fat diet, a low-carb diet, or any other method. It's vital for good health that you choose minimally processed, nutrient-dense food options frequently. Remember, don't believe the misperceptions of the popular diets. There is unfortunately not a one-size-fits-all. And it's vital to remember that your personal preferences, health goals, and outcomes will drive your decision of which diet to choose. So guys, a big congratulations on my side. You are officially done with lesson 4. For your challenge today, I want you to tell me what type of dietary pattern you prescribe to. Do you follow low fat, low carb, or low calorie, or perhaps something else? Remember that you can leave your answer on any of our social media platforms using the hashtag #SureNutrition. Guys, I have thoroughly enjoyed the lesson today with you. Thank you so much for joining. Goodbye for now. Keep safe, everyone, and I'll see you next time for lesson 5.